In this lesson, we're going to continue building our walkie-talkie, and we're going to build the volume knob using the revolve command. So first of all, let me take the antenna we just built, and let's move that off to its own layer. So I'll select the antenna, and under layer 4, I'll just right-click. I'll hit Change Object Layer. I'll click on the name here, and I'm just going to call that antenna. I'll hit Enter. Now, as before, I don't really like this kind of bright color, so I'm just going to click on that. This is just purely personal preference. And let me drag that around and just make that a little bit of a nicer color. And under Properties, I don't like all these UV curves. Again, this is just a visual thing, and it's just how I like to work. I like to just uncheck that visible box. And notice how they clean up. It just makes everything, at least to me, look a lot nicer and a lot cleaner while I'm working. So we can switch that antenna off now that we have it all set. We don't really need that while we're working right now. And I'm going to take these curves, select them, and remember we have a curve layer here, and it's switched off at the moment, and I can still work with it while it's switched off. So I can take those curves, right-click on the curve layer, and I will select Change Object Layer. So those curves are now moved to the curve layer, and because the curve layer is switched off, they've disappeared instantly for us. Again, it's just about kind of keeping my workspace clear and uncluttered. So let's move up here. All right, so we're going to be creating this volume knob. There's a few different ways we could build this. We could have built, just as we did our antenna, we could have built 2 cross sections and ran a nice circular shape up here. But then we'd have to worry about capping that and getting that arc through there. So we're going to use the revolve command, and we're going to take care of all of that with one command. We'll get that all at once. So the first thing before I can successfully revolve this is I'm going to need to know where the center of this shape is going to be. So I'm just going to pick my polyline tool, and I'll click once about in the center, as much as I can anyway, of this sketch. And I'll hold down Shift, and I'll click once approximately in the center of this sketch line there. So now I have this line representing the approximate width at this particular point of the knob. I can draw another line, and with my mid snap on, snap right to the middle and just drag up. And then I can take that, I'll delete that line. So now this is giving me my midpoint line, and I can use this to draw my cross sections, and because we're going to revolve, it needs to know a center of your object. I can also use this as the center. Now notice when I drew that up, we went a little beyond where I want to go, so I can just click and bring that down. Now let's draw a cross section or our profile curve for this revolve. I'll use the control point curve, and we're going to draw this in 2 separate curves and then clean them up. So my curve is going to start right at that end point that'll become our center point when we revolve this. I'll click once, and remember, as we talked about previously, when this revolves, I don't want a point here, so I've got to make sure that this next point I draw is on exactly the same plane as my first control point. So I'm going to come out here somewhere, hold down my Shift key, and click. So now I know that control point is on exactly the same plane as that point. And I can bring my curve out. I don't have to stay right here. Remember, I said we're going to draw 2 curves. So this first curve is just going to represent the arc through the top of this volume knob. So I'll click about there, and then right-click quickly to end the command. And since the last command was the control point curve, remember in Rhino, anytime you want to use the same command again, after you've just used it, you can hit spacebar, tap enter, or tap your right mouse. Any of those 3 will work, and I'll enter right into that command. That time I hit my spacebar. Now I've noticed my sketch is a little off here. You can see this piece of the housing comes down here. So I'm going to ignore that, and I'm going to kind of concentrate on this line that comes down and sort of extends beyond in my sketch. So I'll click there for my endpoint, and I'll go just a little to the right of this curve, and then I'll click up and through there. So now I've got a curve that runs pretty much right through the center of that sketch. Now there's a few different ways to do this next part. I do want a radius around my actual edge, and I could put it in the curve, but that's going to limit me a little bit. So I'm actually going to revolve this with a corner, and then we'll add this radius by filleting the actual surface. But first I need to trim these surfaces, so I'll just select both of those, and I'll press the trim command. And I want to click on the parts to get rid of. So I'll click there, and I'll click there. I'll hit enter to finish that command. And then I'll middle mouse click, and I'm going to choose my join icon. Now note that that is still over on the side here, but sometimes if I'm over here working, it's much faster just to hit the icon here on the middle mouse button pop-up. So we have our profile curve, and now I have this curve, remember that we drew first. Again, that represents my center line now. So now if I go to Surface and choose Revolve, or if I come over to my toolbars, it's under the Surface menu, and it's this icon right here. And it's asking for the curves to revolve, and that's these curves. I'll hit Enter, and now the start of my revolve axis, and I can just hold down Shift and click, or I can click right at the end point of this line. Now if we look at our command line, the start angle is 0, and that's fine. Hit Enter. Now the revolution angle is 360, and that's what I want. I want a full 360 revolve. So I can just hit Enter, and you'll notice with the shaded shape that it's drawn that for us. So let's come up here. Now notice, just like before with the sweep command, this isn't a sealed or a watertight object. I still need to select the object, go up to Solid, and cap planar holes. So now that's all capped. That's a nice solid. Let's go to our front view. So we're going to add a little fillet in here. So we'll go into our Solid tools, and we'll select this icon, which is the variable radius fillet. Remember, we can also find that under the Solid menu, Fillet Edge, and just choose Fillet Edge. I'll go up to my perspective viewport because I want to make sure that I get everything when I click. So I click there, and sure enough, it's gone around and selected all of that for me. I'll hit Enter, but only hit Enter once. Now we have a lot more information here, a lot more options. I'm going to click on Preview and change that to Yes. So now that's drawing that preview in there for me. And then we come back to the front view. So that's kind of showing me what a 1 millimeter radius is going to give me. I think that's a little small, so I can either type a number, or since I only have one handle here, I can actually click and kind of drag to see what I'm going to get. And I think that's a little too large. And it looks like that's about right. I do like having nice even numbers. So I'll just click this, and I'll type 2 and hit Enter. So I know that gives me a nice 2 millimeter fillet on there. Jump just to my perspective window just to see how things look. I think that looks pretty good, so I'll go ahead and hit Enter. So now that's created that for me. And let's continue working with the volume knob in the next lesson.